Hey fearsome friends, welcome back. It seems that it's very easy to find stalker stories, which is worrying to say the least. When will people be able to finally feel safe walking the streets? From people being followed on a walk in broad daylight, to others feeling unsafe at their place of work. Here are 14 true spine-chilling stalker stories for you to get cozy, comfy, warm to. Are you scared yet? Keep being creepy. I was about 13 to 14 years old when this happened, and I was alone, slowly walking home after seeing a few of my girlfriends off. It was getting late and outside looked a bit dark. I'll guess maybe around 7:30 p.m. And I was about a block and a half away and about to walk up and past a bus stop when a bus pulled up and opened its doors to let off some passengers. I thought nothing of it and walked past an older man who was maybe in his 30s. He was the only person getting off though, it seemed. As I said before, I was taking my time walking, so I wasn't immediately spooked when I heard him singing closely behind me. I was just thinking to myself, he's probably trying to get past me as the sidewalk is really narrow. So with that, I picked up the pace enough so the guy didn't feel like I was blocking him or anything. But even as I walked faster, it seemed he just quickened his pace right along with mine. At that point, I took notice as to what songs he was actually singing, and to my complete stomach-flipping, nausea-inducing horror, he was singing old-school love songs. I walked faster still, but he just kept on matching my quick pace. He was now singing louder the faster I went, and I was spazzing in my head that I was absolutely certain this weird old man was following me. I kept trying to walk faster, and he was right on my heels. When we'd get to the sidewalk in front of my lawn, I then took off in a sprint and up the steps onto my porch, and of course I didn't have my keys, so I frantically rang the doorbell and banged on the door for someone to let me in. I looked back and the guy had stopped walking and was stood on the sidewalk in front of my house, just staring at me. I was absolutely terrified, thinking about what his motives could be. Nothing good, obviously. He then said, "I wasn't trying to scare you," as he kept eye contact for a second, then continued to walk down the street. I was sick to my stomach with anxiety, as I was sure he'd only stopped because it was clear I was going to cause a scene. I was hoping that he'd thought I'd just run into a random house for help. Otherwise, this dude knows where I live now. My little 12 to 13-year-old sister came and opened up the door for me, as she was the only one in the house. I sometimes think about how things might have ended had he seen who opened the door. I live in Finland in a fairly small city, and this happened to me a year ago when I was 14. It was a Friday evening, and on every Friday our mum let us go to the store and buy candy. So me and my 12-year-old sister left our house to go to the store, and it was already dark outside. We made our way to the closest store, which was over a mile away, and whilst walking, at some point there was a man behind us walking the same way. I didn't think much about it at the time, as he could just be going to the same store, so I continued chatting with my sister while the man was behind us, following at a safe distance. We got to the store with no complications, and the man followed us into the store. We took our time selecting our candy and got to the register to pay. While I was packing the candy into my backpack, I saw this man buying only a chocolate bar. I thought it was a pretty far way to go for a chocolate bar, and at this point my suspicions started to rise. My sister and I leave the store, and we started making our way back. We walked for a while, and I quickly glanced over my shoulder to see the man was still there, following us. I looked at my sister, who seemed totally unaware about the man's presence, and we continued on our walk. Up ahead of us was an unlit dirt road that continued for a good part of the trip. So I looked back again, and there the man still was about 60 feet away. At this point I was almost certain that he was following us, because on our way to the store he didn't walk this part of the way behind us. The dirt road goes through a forest, and it had a curve at the start of it. Once we got to the curve, I looked back again and noticed that the man can't see us, so I pulled my sister to the woods and we ducked down to hide. My sister was saying something, and I just whispered to stay quiet as we waited for the man to come. I could see the shadow of him coming down the road, and he was starting to look for us. He was walking back and forth, and now I was certain he was following us all that time. My heart was racing, and I tried to be as quiet as possible. The man thankfully didn't find us, but continued running forwards. We stayed in the forest for a while before getting the courage to come out. Then we walked the rest of the way home with no problems. And once we were home, we ate our candy and had a good night. But that really did bother me for a while, and especially my sister. Thinking about this still gives me the chills, and the thought of getting caught in that situation creeps me out, and I try not to think about it. I'll begin by giving a little background. I'm a female, and at the time this happened I was 16 and working at a chain coffee place while in high school. I'm in college now and I'm 19, and 7 hours away from said place. It happened at a time in my life when I was very shy and had a tough time standing up for myself. In retrospect, I could have handled it a lot better. I used to work closing shifts with my best friend after school. It'd be from 3 to 10 p.m. or 5 to 10 p.m, and we worked a relatively dead store, so we spent most of our time playing music and talking. We did our duties like taking the trash out and restocking, etc. Although both of us always dreaded taking the trash out, as we had to go out the back. The dumpsters were behind the store, in a dimly lit area next to a sketchy liquor store. One night a man came in. It wasn't unusual to have customers come near closing. It was just uncommon to see anyone we didn't already know, as our store was mostly just regulars. He was lanky and probably around 30, and I mostly just remember his eyes. They were piercing, the type that never break a stare. I remember initially thinking he was attractive. The way he spoke was short and concise, just ordering a small hot latte. I made his order and that was that. I told my friend about how I thought he was attractive, and from then on we started to refer to him as the small hot latte guy. He came in a bunch of times after that, each time staying a little longer and longer, talking a little more and more. One day he came in with a woman, presumably his girlfriend. I remember I felt a little weird, like she was staring at me, or like they had spoken about me beforehand. She glanced over at him and said, "Wow, she is pretty." But I didn't think much of it, said thank you, served them, and I thought that would be the end of it. He then began showing up and talking to me a lot without her. He started off as being friendly. I honestly don't remember what we even talked about. Music, I think. Then he got kind of flirty. Initially I was just flattered, but being underage and immature, I didn't even think about the fact that it was kind of alarming. He began to stay for a while. Sometimes he would bring a laptop or a notebook. I could feel him staring at me and listening to our conversations. But at that point I wasn't getting creep vibes from him, as my coworker and I had dealt with our fair share of creeps. He then somehow got my number, and to this day I honestly don't know how. He texted me, and somehow I still wasn't creeped out. We would talk about music a lot. Then I began to learn more about him. He was in his late 30s and had prior problems with substance abuse that he never really got into. He went back to school for art and would show me his pieces. He'd also send me a lot of pictures of nature that I thought were nice. But looking back, they were actually pretty creepy. For example, there was a picture of his backyard that he sent at like 3 a.m. He'd stay and work on his art as well. He then told me he barely enjoyed hot lattes, he just wanted to come and see me. He would come in and began giving me gifts. And this was the point I'd finally started realizing that I did not like the situation. He began by just giving little snacks or drinks. I would accept them, but would never eat or drink them. It wasn't that I necessarily thought he had ill intentions, I just had a hard time accepting gifts. I remember one night he brought me a book about one of his favorite artists. I reluctantly took it, but had tried to decline before. I remember telling him about one of my favorite musicians and sent him a link to a performance I really liked. Then he started being kind of sexual while still talking about the song. He then began talking super suggestively, and I would laugh it off and decline when he'd asked to send pictures. I began talking less and less and told my friend about the situation. She agreed that it was getting creepy and said I should maybe change my schedule. I told her I'd be fine. I'm stubborn. But he'd still come every week at closing time, and he'd even stay in his car until we closed, which meant he'd watch me go to the back to take the trash out. I began making excuses as to why I couldn't talk and began going to the back of the store when I'd see him. He then sent me a bunch of texts about how graceful I looked while working, but I didn't respond. He kept texting me and I told him I didn't want to talk anymore. He sent a bunch of messages describing how much I meant to him and how he wouldn't be okay. I started to freak out. I blocked his number, but still I returned to work. I honestly thought he'd stop coming, but I was wrong. I felt uneasy the whole shift. My friend said that if he came, to just go to the back and wait it out. I saw his car coming and my heart sank. I was on the verge of tears and hurried to the back of the store. I could hear them talking, but couldn't decipher what exactly was being said. Then about 10 minutes later, she came to the back, and I could visibly see that she was upset. We ended up both just crying and hugging each other, which is not the first time we've done that. She told me he kept asking to see me and asking how I was, and she just kept refusing. She told him how I was underage and how he made me feel uncomfortable, but he wouldn't give up. Eventually she threatened him and he left. We were both shaken up, but I thought it was over. It was time to take the trash out and lock up, and we both felt okay by then. I was opening the door while juggling 3 bags of trash and saw something on the ground. I was confused at first, but then realized what it was. It was flowers and a note. I felt sick to my stomach and looked around the parking lot, but I didn't see his car, thankfully. I threw them out immediately and told my friend I didn't want to read the note, but she read it and told me that I had to. And it was something to the effect of, "I've never felt so connected to someone. You're breaking my heart. Please don't do this. I'm sorry," etc. Looking back, I honestly didn't lead him on, but initially I just had felt as if I was in the wrong. Nonetheless, we turned the corner to take the trash out, and both prayed the parking lot was empty. But it wasn't. Let's just say the trash was not going to get taken out that night. I continued working there and still worked there on my breaks from college. I had different hours after that, and the summer I was going to leave for my freshman year, I saw him again. It was around 3 p.m. It was busy, and we made eye contact, then he left. That was the last time I saw him. Looking back, I was so naive and could have handled the situation so much better, and I am forever thankful to my friend. So my roommate and I used to live in Virginia, in a place that was about 20 minutes away from her mum's apartment, where we used to dog sit for her all the time. One night, after we'd dropped the dogs off, we stopped at Wells Fargo near our apartment so my roommate could deposit the money her mum had given her for watching the dogs. It was, I think, around 11 at night, and as we were about to pull into our complex, she said, "That car is following us." I asked which car she meant, and she said to look behind, and sure enough, there was a black car following us down the road. She switched on her turn signal, and so did the black car. I asked her how long he'd been there, and she said he'd been following us since we left her mum's house. Now, not only was I freaked out, but I was thoroughly annoyed. I yelled at her and demanded to know why she hadn't said something sooner, but she said she hadn't wanted to scare me. I asked her if he'd followed us through Wells Fargo, and she said yes. He'd pulled up behind us while she'd deposited the money at the ATM, and pulled through after us without depositing anything or stopping. After calling her an idiot for not telling me until we were home, I told her to turn right after the gate at our complex instead of left, because our apartment was one of the first on the end. It was bad enough that he knew what complex we were in. He didn't need to know which apartment was ours, so she turned right and I told her to floor it. We drove through the complex as fast as we could and lost him near the back of it. We then parked across the street from our apartment, turned off the car and crouched down low to see if he would drive by again. We didn't see him, but we also didn't feel safe. We ran inside as quickly as we could to grab some blankets and pillows, the can of pepper spray we had, and my knife. Then we got back in the car, and I called my ex-boyfriend in a panic, asking him what else we could do. My roommate said she'd drive us to the movie theatre she worked at, because it wouldn't close for a few hours, and there would still be people in the parking lot. My ex kept asking me questions about the car that I couldn't answer, so I gave my roommate the phone. She described the car to the best of her ability, and then stopped mid-sentence when we got onto the highway. He was following us again. My ex asked if she was certain it was the same car, and she said it had to be. She'd never seen the license plate, but she recognized the body and the headlights, plus the silhouette of the man who was driving it. She gave me back the phone and called her manager at work to tell him we were going to be coming by and what was going on. She managed to get a few cars ahead of the black car and got to the parking lot. She parked in the back before anyone else pulled in, but we didn't see the car that was following us. One of her co-workers then came outside and parked next to us to wait while my roommate called the cops. My ex promised we'd be okay and that he would have been there if he could have been, and that if anything else happened to call him so that he could talk to his sergeant about leaving for the weekend to check on us. He was in the army and was on base a few hours away. The police said that since we didn't have the plate number, there was nothing that they could do, but when we told them where we lived, they said there was going to be a few officers there on patrol that night anyway. Since we couldn't tell whether or not he'd followed us into the parking lot, they told us to just go home, but we ended up sleeping in the car in the Walmart parking lot and didn't go home until the next night. We never saw that black car again. Now, I used to live in Stockholm, Sweden, and there I attended high school and met my then boyfriend Jack. He will come into play later. Now, I was very active on social media then. I had Gifyo back when that was a thing, and I used the GIFs to link to my blog to show beauty products and hairstyles, etc. For those of you who don't know what Gifyo was, it was basically Instagram but only for GIFs. Back in the day I had a pretty large following on that site, but the site had its downsides, particularly the nasty sexual messages you could get quite often. Part 1. The Meeting. Robin started following me and was so nice and friendly. It felt genuinely like Robin wished me all the best and made me happy whenever he or she would write. Robin said that she was a male, and 23 at the time, and was from the US, but that he had Swedish relatives. I thought that was pretty cool, and we would chat a few times a month in English. I also loved to sing, and I uploaded covers to YouTube. Robin would be so excited when I'd release new covers and compliment me, which in turn would make me feel great. It was so nice to have an online friend who seemed truly happy for me. Although this behaviour started to become too much sometimes, and it started to feel wrong. Part 2. The Flags. Robin sent me a drawing. He said it was a portrait of me. It was a girl with animal ears, making a cute pose with her hand, piercing green eyes and whiskers. He said it is like me but mixed with a cat, my favourite animal. I was beyond impressed. It was so cute and I was flattered that someone would draw me. But that excitement turned to ash in my mouth one night, and this is where it all started for real, and where the flags should have gone up. Now I play League of Legends, and one of my favourite champions back then was Ahri, especially in her Foxfire Ahri skin. I was scrolling through Safari on my phone to find a wallpaper of her to have on my phone, and then I saw the picture. The fan art Robin had made, only that the eyes were now yellow like Ahri's. I clicked the picture and it linked me to a DeviantArt account. The caption was something like, "Casual cute Firefox Ahri, posted 3 years ago." I wrote to Robin and told him how upset I was that he'd stolen a drawing from an artist, edited the colours a bit and claimed to have worked hard making it himself. I explained to him how awful it is to take someone else's work and say that you yourself made it. He said he was ashamed and sorry, and said he only wanted to impress me and make me smile. I couldn't stay mad at him for long, but I was wary now. So it had been a while since I had posted a cover, and Robin made sure as hell I knew it had been a while. He would nag and plead with me to make another one, to the point that I told him to back the flipping burgers off. I posted a cover a few weeks later. Part 3. Too Close for Comfort. I'd broken up with Jack, the boyfriend. We went our different ways and it was okay. Robin, on the other hand, was not. He couldn't for the sake of humanity grasp why we had broken up, and pleaded yet again, but this time it was a pleading for me to get back together with my boyfriend. I tolerated this at first, because to most people we seemed perfectly happy together, Jack and I. But I got really upset with him, because after a few days, he would ask if we were getting back, and I just explained that Jack was unfaithful and was seeing other girls, flirting with them. Robin's response was, "Oh, but you can't forgive him. You're not going back." I was done. I told him to leave me alone, and he did. Part 4. Found Out. Now, just like the last time, I was scrolling on the internet and thought one night that I wanted to listen to others doing the same cover that I had. I started scrolling through the list and saw my face on a thumbnail with the caption of the song name Cover by Me. But this was not my video and not my YouTube account. My heart froze. I felt myself grow cold. I clicked on it and my audio started playing. It was my voice, my picture, but not my name. I clicked the profile and the coldness intensified. Every cover of me, every video of me from my YouTube, Instagram, friends' YouTubes, Jack's YouTube and SoundCloud was on there. The videos dated back 2 whole years, and the account said that her name was Jenny and that she was the one singing, producing the music, and even going as far as taking videos of my relatives and saying it was her family. I was confused, scared and angry. Who would do this? I got my answer with the most twisted thing I've experienced online. In the comments to the videos were comments from Robin's account. "Thanks so much for dedicating this song to me," Robin had written. "Oh, no bother, Robin. I made it all for you," Jenny replied. It was like this stalker was either two stalkers, or this person had made up two characters and was talking to himself or herself through the comments. This freaked me out big time. I wrote to all my friends whose content was stolen, wrote to my ex and my new boyfriend, now fiancé, and told them to help me shut this thing down. The account was shut down within 20 hours. I blocked all accounts linked to Robin, including the Jenny accounts. I locked all social medias, removed everyone I didn't know, and I Google image reversed all my profile pictures, and nothing came up. I was paranoid for about a year after this, and I didn't trust anyone I didn't know. Part 5. The Aftermath. Robin made new accounts to follow me, which I blocked. I have an official Instagram for work, which he or she could be looking at, but it is something I've now just accepted will happen, and that I shouldn't live in internet fear because of one person. Just a month ago I logged into Tumblr. I wanted to see if I had some juicy memes stashed there somewhere. Yeah, I know, cringe. I then saw blocked accounts, but only one was blocked. Guess who? Robin had changed the Tumblr blog from his or her Robin fakery to something new, something personal. The blog was filled with angst, just like all other Tumblrs, but this one was filled with self-hatred posts, extremism and racism, and long posts written in Swedish. This was the first time it hit me. This person was Swedish. I told my best friend to go through the blog to see if her FBI skills could sniff something out, and she did. I'll put together all evidence that her and I combined know so far. Part 6. Conclusion. The stalker was probably born in 1989, and he or she lives in the same part of the city as my parents, where I lived before. We're not sure on the gender, but it seems to depend. The stalker couldn't have gone to high school with me, but must have known me through something else, a mutual friend maybe. He or she stole my content for years, pretended to be my friend to get more content, and is probably still checking in on me. My best guess is that it was a girl who wanted to be me, have my life and my boyfriend. When I stopped creating new content and broke up with Jack, her whole made-up world started to fall apart. If Robin somehow reads this, I hope you'll find acceptance and happiness in yourself, because it is no life living it through someone else. Go in peace, and I still to this day have no clue who Robin is. So this story happened when I was 11 years old. I live in a small village in Serbia where none of this ever happens. My friend and I were on our way home from a soccer tournament that is held every summer. It was almost midnight as we walked and talked our way home, when we spotted this shady guy. I'm going to describe him as best I can. He was wearing a black hoodie and jeans and was bald. At first we didn't think too much of it and paid no attention to him. It was just a guy going home like us, right? But I had this gut feeling looming that this guy was not okay. I mentioned to my friend calmly that I thought someone was following us, so we did 3 circles around the block just to test it, and still the man was following us. Just a note, we didn't have our phones on us, as we didn't think we needed them, and our parents knew where we were, so why bother? My friend at that point wanted to start running home, but the man could outrun us easily, and even if we made it there, he would then know where we lived. So I told him to just continue walking to a 24/7 gas station that thank goodness my cousin was working at that night. We told him what was going on and that we were scared. He told us that it was probably just someone going home too, but we explained to him that we'd made 3 circles around the block and that he was there every step of the way. After that, he believed us. Just then, the man entered the gas station and was standing right next to me. He gave me a scary smile, and at that moment I was absolutely crapping myself. I told my cousin that my friend and I have to go to the bathroom, so we did so and jumped out the window, booking it out of there. The next day we'd heard that a child was playing outside with his brother in the front yard, and a strange man had asked him if he wanted some candy and pointed towards his white van. Thankfully the child said no and grabbed his brother and went inside the safety of their house. My cousin is good friends with that child's parents, so he called me and told me everything. I wanted to report this to the police, but the man didn't harm us nor the child, so ultimately they couldn't do anything. This creepy encounter happened to my mother in 1987. She had just started her career as a high school teacher in a fairly large developing city, and she loved it. She was newly assigned to work there, far from her hometown, and was willing to relocate to be closer to her aging parents. At that time, the main way to relocate was to post a small announcement in a professional journal, offering to trade her teaching location with someone assigned to her hometown. Among the various creeps who answered her ad with love letters, one particularly stood out. This guy showed up to her high school one day, in an attempt to meet her. When the school custodian told him that she had just left on the bus with a co-worker, he decided to follow said bus with his own car, but failed to track the bus station she got off at. The next day he went back to the school and was able to exchange a few words with her. He said that he was in love. He had never met her before that, and was willing to marry her. She brushed it off and said that they didn't know each other, and that she wanted to focus on her career before settling down. He insisted that he was a policeman, that he already knew her address, the names of her parents, and their addresses, so he'd basically run a background check on her. A little creeped out, she pretended to be in a hurry and left him there. A few weeks later, she was visiting her parents in her hometown. The mailman delivered her a heavy package. The guy had sent her various issues of Cop magazine, in which he had written a few op-eds and attached a letter explaining that she should get to know him better through these and write back to him. She never did though, and it freaked her out for a few weeks because the guy kept sending her letters. Thankfully, he eventually stopped. She told me that even though she didn't feel that her life was threatened, she was still anxious going back to her job for a few weeks after that. Eventually, though, she never relocated, as her ad only seemed to attract creeps, and she met my father a few years later. So I guess there is still a happy ending here. So I'm a 21-year-old female, and at the time of this incident I was with my now 12-year-old little brother. The creepy dude I'm going to tell you about looked to be at least 30, maybe 40, but it was hard to tell exactly because he was wearing a mask because of the pandemic and a hat. So me and my little brother were planning a trip to Walmart for his Easter basket and some clothes. Now our local Walmart is a little far in distance, and you have to get the bus that takes little over an hour, depending on who gets on. We'd boarded a 15-minute bus to get to the next stop we needed, before catching the one that will take us straight to Walmart. A few minutes after we'd gotten onto said bus, This man gets on and I think nothing of it. I had no reason to. People use the bus. So I was sitting there minding my own business when I realized that our stop is coming up. I decided to get off at the stop before people get off for Walmart, as the next stop is a shorter distance, but you have to cross 2 main streets. I rang the bell but did it too early, as the driver stopped before the stop I wanted to get off at, which was maybe 15 to 20 seconds after I'd rung the bell. I didn't want to bother the bus driver, so we packed up and got off. And the second we were at the door, I noticed the man from earlier, who was sitting next to the exit, had gotten up and followed us out. This was when my senses picked up, and I took more notice of him, although I pretended I hadn't, and I realized at that point that he was a few steps directly behind us. I told my little brother to hurry up, with him asking me why. So I then told him that there may be someone following us. This idiot stopped, turned around and looked directly at the guy. At that moment the creepy dude pulled out a phone. I already had my phone out, so I put it on selfie mode to keep an eye behind us, and in the camera you could see him looking up at us, but every time my little brother stopped and turned around to see if he was still there, creepy dude just looked down at his phone. This was supposed to be a 30-minute walk, but it turned out being 40 to 45, because my little brother kept stopping and turning around all the damn time. Finally we got to Walmart, where there were 2 doors, and I went past the first one to go into the second one, hoping to blend into the crowd of people that were standing there. My little brother had to take his time grabbing a cart, and pretty soon afterwards, we'd grabbed the cart and creepy dude came in through the same door that we had. He looked around for a few minutes, then spotted us. I started walking off with my little brother, and the guy was walking after us. We went through the ladies' clothes aisle, then the ladies' underwear, and he was still following us. Then we got to the boys' clothes, still following us. My little brother didn't like the selection they had, so I asked him if he wanted to go to the men's section to see if they had anything in his size. And that's when I noticed the guy go into the men's aisle too. I told my little brother to hurry up and choose, so he chose a shirt and we left through the opposite way of the men's aisle and went around. We did a few U-turns until I was confident we'd lost him. As for the rest of the day, we thankfully didn't see him, and now I'm at home writing this. Just to preface this story, this happened about 12 years ago when I was around 13 years old. The memories and emotions of this incident had faded away into the back of my mind, but recently I started having flashbacks of it, and it led to multiple panic attacks whilst driving and being in public. After some deliberation, I thought perhaps writing about it and sharing it with a community that might understand the fear of experiencing this sort of thing might help me feel validated with my emotions, so here goes. I was a 13-year-old living abroad when this happened. To give some short background info that might help you understand the story better, I was living in an apartment complex. Every morning the school buses would arrive at the main entrance of the entire complex and pick up the kids for school. The church I was attending at that time also operated buses to help people get back home. So every Sunday after the services were done, I would take the church bus back home. I never doubted my sense of security and safeness, since this kind of system made me feel safe and protected. That was until I met him on one Sunday morning. I was a church kid, and quite an involved one too. I was serving the youth group as a part of the welcome team for newcomers when I met him. He entered the chapel with his mother following behind, and she explained that they had recently moved to the country and were just starting to settle down. My first impression of him was just that he was lanky, shy, and very quiet. He seemed so harmless, innocent, and naive. So when his mother left him after filling out the form, I gave him a smile, greeted him, led him to the empty seat, and I thought nothing more of him, until I saw him again in my small group. I greeted him again, saying something like, "So nice to see you again." I still remember how he just shyly nodded, not really answering me. When the small group time ended, I took out haichu, Korean soft candy, and gave one to everyone in the group, even the teacher. And as I handed the rectangular candy to him, he softly whispered, "Thank you," and walked away. That was the first time I heard him speak. Now, I hadn't realized that he was living in the same complex as me until I got off the church bus and saw him coming down the steps of the bus as well. It was a funny coincidence, so I told him how weird it was that we were in the same small group and also living in the same complex. He nodded again, and I walked off first because he was waiting for his mom and little sister who were coming behind him. My apartment building was number 20, the first in the row of buildings. I had opened the door and was about to go in when he followed behind me. Me, still in that newcomer greeting mode, responded to this by asking him if he was living in the same building as well. He nodded again. I noticed that his mother and sister were not here yet, so I got into the elevator first, asked him if he was going to wait for them, and gave him my goodbye when he quietly nodded yes. The next morning I saw him waiting in the lobby when I got out of the elevator. He was alone, and I asked him if he was waiting for his sister. He nodded, so I just gave him a quick "have a nice day" and ran off so that I wouldn't miss my school bus. And for every day of that week, I saw him waiting for his sister in the lobby, standing in the corner right in front of the elevators. I didn't think much of it. I would always say hi or good morning to him, and he would just nod or wave timidly. There was nothing more to it than that. That is, until one Sunday when I got back home after church. He was walking behind me, this time together with his sister and mom, so I thought I would be a nice girl and hold the door for them. I waited holding the door open, only to have all three of them walk right past my building. Strange, I thought. So I peeked my head out to see that they were entering building number 15, which was 5 buildings down the street. At first I didn't think much of it, thinking that they might have moved out of building 20 and into 15. But when I stepped out of the elevator the next morning to see him again in the lobby, in the same corner he was standing in every morning, my heart sank deep. I don't know how I responded to it, but I remember choosing not to confront him, because I was in denial that this was actually happening and didn't have the courage to ask him for an answer. Things quickly progressed from that day. I started getting late-night calls to my cell phone, the typical not going to speak, just going to breathe heavily kind of call that you get that makes you feel insecure, even though you know you're safe in your room. He also stopped waiting for me in the lobby since that morning, but would stand in the far corner of the street every day and watch me wait for and get on the bus. Me becoming hypervigilant didn't help with the situation either. I could always spot him watching me, even though he would often try to hide behind a thick tree or the guard's cabin. It made me feel sick to my stomach, but I don't think I felt so threatened and cornered to the point, at least in that moment, that I wanted to seek adult help. I was a very, very private teenager who was already keeping some traumatic experiences a secret from my parents, so naturally this felt like another secret that I would keep so they wouldn't worry about me. At church I kept up my bright facade, but would distance myself as far as possible to avoid any sort of contact with him. I actively put this distance between him and me, because whenever I decided to play by my facade and say hi to him, instead of returning my greetings, he would stare once at my face and then drop his gaze down to my private areas. The fact that it was summer and I was wearing shorts didn't help at all. Whenever he stared at my thighs and between my legs, the shame, the embarrassment, the feeling that I was being dirtied by his gaze, the anxiety, the paranoia, it was too much for me. I started skipping the small group session and left right after the youth group ended so I would avoid getting home with him at the same time. On days that I did happen to attend small group, I just sat quietly, unwilling to speak a single word while he stared at me intensely. One day while the teacher was leading the discussion, he suddenly burst into an angry yell, shouting, "Why do you keep ignoring me when you clearly know that I like you?" Needless to say, I was embarrassed, ashamed, shocked and terrified all at the same time. The teacher tried to de-escalate the situation, but he stormed out after yelling out how frustrated he was with me for not returning his affection. I wanted to leave as well, but the fear that I might run into him made me stay in my seat while everyone in the group quietly whispered among themselves about this sudden drama that was happening before them. It was a huge shock to me that he was doing all these things because he liked me, but what shook me more at that moment was the fact that the teacher didn't seem to be fazed at all by this sudden outburst. She didn't seem surprised by the fact that he had such feelings for me, but instead she casted glances at me with some sort of knowing in her eyes. I had always wondered how he got hold of my phone number, and this was it. The teacher dismissed everyone but asked me to stay. I was always the model student at church, but the moment I was left alone with her, I lost it. I cursed and swore and demanded her to tell me if she knew how much he was making my life miserable. She told me she knew he liked me. Apparently he started liking me because of that stupid-ass candy I gave him on the first day. She had given him my number because she thought it was cute seeing him like me so much. So I told her what he had been doing, how he waited for me every morning in the lobby, even though he lived in a different building, how he would stare and watch me from the corner of the street, how he would stare between my thighs and my chest, how he would call me late at night with the heavy breathing and all. I was having trouble speaking and breathing because of how much I was crying, but I remember yelling, "He's like a goddamn stalker." And that was when I fully recognized that I was being stalked. When I became quiet due to the shock of realization, the teacher took her chance to speak and told me that he was a mentally troubled kid who didn't know better, so I just needed to bear with it. That was the end of the conversation. Honestly, there is a gap in my memory after that day, so it's hard for me to recall what events had led up to it. But the last time I saw him was when I had the most fearful encounter with him. I was already on the church bus, waiting. There were 2 girls sitting a couple of rows ahead of me, and the bus was silent, other than that. I was sitting by the aisle when I saw him get on the bus. The strange thing was that when he got on, the 2 girls suddenly turned extremely hostile towards him and told him to get off the bus, calling him a pervert. He responded angrily, "Well, you whores aren't the ones I want to see anyway, so shut up." This was the first time I heard him speak such profanities, so I honestly was shocked. Then he fixed his eyes straight to me, walked over to where I was, and sat a row diagonally behind my seat. My heart was pounding at this point, and I wanted to sit by the windows to hide from his gaze, but I was scared that he would think of it as some invitation to sit next to me, so I stayed frozen in my seat until more people came in and only moved to the window seat when an adult asked if they could sit next to me. I think there was an instinctive feeling that told me I couldn't get off together with him, so I purposefully got off at the stop before my apartment. It was only a 600-meter walk from the bus stop to my home, so I mixed in with the people and got off the bus with them. It had stopped by the side entrance of another apartment complex. I just needed to walk down the street to get to mine, but the street was empty and deserted because it was one of those areas that were waiting to be developed by the city. So I started walking towards my home when I realized that he had also gotten off with me. He was walking a few feet behind me, and my gut wrenched as he got closer and closer. Something told me being alone with him on this street was dangerous, so I broke into a run until I saw an alleyway that parted off from the road. In my panic, I turned into the alleyway and was relieved when I saw that there were some smaller shops that were busy with people. There were people hanging in the alleyway, chilling by the benches outside and stuff. So I was certain that he couldn't have followed me into the alley after I had run in, but I still looked behind me to check just in case. And there he was, still following me. He had run after me. My relief quickly turned into terror, and I hastened my pace, purposefully weaving in between the people in hopes of losing him. But whenever I looked back, I could still see him. Eventually the people hanging by the shops thinned out, and I was walking in an empty alleyway again. On the opposite end of the alley, I could see that there was a bigger road with more cars and people. I was already quite out of breath, as I wasn't a fit person, but with my last strength I ran for the busy road, hoping to lose him if he was still behind me. I stopped once I reached the busy road, and turned around to look into an empty alley. I stood for an extra minute staring into the alley to confirm that he wasn't following me. Fortunately, my friend's house was close by, and so I stayed at her place until I felt it was safe enough to walk back home. That was the last time I saw him. I stopped going to the small groups. I started serving children's department as an accompanist, so I could avoid going to the youth group. I didn't see him again after that, but one time I happened to meet my small group teacher, and she told me that he had left the country. Apparently he was reported multiple times at school for lewd behavior, such as sneaking into the girls' restroom. That was why the girls on the bus were grossed out by him, and in the end had to be expelled from school. I think that was when I decided to bury the terror and the fear away, because he was no longer an immediate threat in my life. Funny story though. After that whole incident, I had to watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off at school, but the moment Ferris's friend Cameron Fry showed on the screen, I had to run to the bathroom to throw up, because the actor's face looked exactly like him, and just watching his face brought back the trauma. Now I can't watch that movie, but looking at Cameron's face still gives me anxiety. I often wonder what might have become of him, and wonder if his parents knew what their son was. If he was truly suffering from mental illness, my only hope is that he received the proper treatment so that no one else had to go through what I did. My husband and I had been married in May, but he was still living in student housing until his lease was up, which ended up being in August 2019. We found the perfect-sized apartment for our needs, in the city his school was located. It was kind of a sketchy area, despite most of it looking decent, but there was definitely some questionable activity going on at all times of the day. To make the situation worse, we didn't have a car at the time, so we had to walk and ride the city bus everywhere we needed to go. It felt unsafe to me since I've only ever lived in small towns growing up, and on one particular night, the unsafe feeling really kicked into high gear when we had to get groceries on foot. On the way home to our apartment, we cut through a darkened parking lot, and a man emerged from between two buildings that were just on the edge of it. He had the worst vibe about him, and that made me go on high alert. My husband tried to calm me down by being the rational person he is. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I continued to look over my shoulder regardless, and sure enough, every turn we made, he made. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end at this point, and I looked at my husband, told him that this man was deliberately following us, and he was taking each turn we were. He stayed far enough away from us to where it wouldn't look too suspicious, though. I told my husband that even though we were tired and had groceries, we needed to take a different route home. He continued following us for another block or so, and that was when we decided to book it. We turned down a random street, found a car, and squatted behind it. When the man turned the corner, he was looking every which way for us, and every time he came close to the car we were hiding behind, we would slowly, and as quietly as we could, sneak to the other side. I called up my mum in tears, trying to stay as quiet and as calm as I could. But yeah, looking back, maybe calling the cops, even on a suspicion, would have probably been better. Anyway, the man eventually gave up, thank goodness, and once we knew he was for sure gone, we sped-walked the rest of the way home and locked the door the minute we shut it. It felt like my husband and I were in a thriller horror movie, and that we were the main characters trying to survive. I don't know what that man's intentions were, and I don't want to know. This happened a few hours ago, and I feel like I need to write it out to fully get over it. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I work at a gas station off of a highway. I usually work short shifts because I'm in college, and I've only closed twice because I don't work the late shift, but I was covering for someone tonight. I was alone after 5 p.m. because my manager had left and the garage closed. It was pretty boring tonight besides the few conversationalists who came in, and one guy who got surprisingly angry when I wouldn't give him my number. However, I'm wondering if he tried to get revenge tonight. At around 9:30 p.m, I noticed a car just sitting at the gas pump furthest away from the store, and they weren't pumping gas, and their car was still running. After a little while, I shut the outside lights off because it was near to closing time, and I wanted them to leave, but they didn't. I called my boyfriend because I felt uneasy, and I wanted him to tell me I was being paranoid. I hoped they were just some kids smoking weed in their car or something, so he kept me company on the phone as I counted the draw. After I finished, I closed everything up and went to the back to put my paperwork away. In the back, I checked the cameras, and looking at them I could see just the corner of their car. It was as if they were strategically parked so I couldn't see their license plate, but I could still see they were out there, meaning they'd stayed there for over half an hour in complete darkness. I told my boyfriend I was getting freaked out, and he told me to just hurry up and get home and everything would be okay. Now at my gas station, I have to lock the front door from the outside, meaning I would have to stand in perfect view of the car with my back turned. This scared me, but I knew I had to do it if I wanted to leave. I have pepper spray, so I made sure I carried it in my hand, just in case, and I went outside and tried locking the door as quickly as possible. I still hoped I was being paranoid. As my back was turned while I locked the door, I heard a car door close behind me, and I felt my heart drop. It was like my worst fear had come true. My hands began to shake as I fumbled with the lock. I was so scared he was coming up behind me. When I finally locked it, it felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. I yanked my key out of the door and speed-walked to my car. I still wanted to seem unbothered, praying this wasn't what I thought it was, and once I got in, I locked my car door and looked out the window. I could see a man in a baseball hat, walking around in the dark. I was still on the phone with my boyfriend, and I started freaking out, saying things like, oh my god, he's got out of his car. What do I do?" My boyfriend told me to get out of there as fast as possible, and I did just that. But as I started to back out of the parking spot, I saw the man get back in his car. As I started to drive away, the man in the car started to leave too. Now I knew this wasn't a coincidence. When I pulled out of our parking lot, I pulled out right in front of someone, probably scaring them half to death, but I wanted to put a car in between me and the man. To my horror, the car ended up turning, and my pursuer sped up to be right behind me. I couldn't doubt myself anymore. I knew this guy was following me. When I think back to it now, he wasn't being very subtle at all. I knew I couldn't go home because I did not want this creep knowing where I lived. At this point, my mum and boyfriend were both on the phone, and they told me to drive to the police station, so I did. The man followed me all the way there, and once the police station turned into view, the man's car sped up and flew past me. I have never felt so relieved in my life. I drove home as fast as possible, literally shaking as I began to process what had just happened. I'd never been followed like that before, but I couldn't help think what could have happened if I took a few seconds longer to lock the door, or even worse, if I went up to the car to ask them to leave before I'd closed. Once I got home, my little brother offered to give me one of his pocket knives. His sweetness made me feel better. I'm definitely going to call my manager in the morning to check the security footage. About 14 years ago, when I was 19, I was the assistant manager at a shoe store in a sort of outlet mall. One day I was having to work alone because we were really understaffed. I think at the time there were only 4 employees working for our store in total, and our manager was split between our sister store and ours. These 2 women came in and were shopping for shoes, and had spent a while in there trying stuff on. About 15 minutes after they'd come in, this creepy guy came in the store and smiled at me in this eerie way, which immediately made me feel uneasy. I can still vividly remember the guy's face and his clothes. He was wearing coral-coloured trousers, a button-up shirt and a tan trench coat. He had those huge 80s glasses and greasy black hair, and he was walking around the store slowly, keeping an eye on me from over the shelves, and always smiling. It was a small store, and he kept alternating between the men's and women's sections. The women finally came up to pay, and I was getting nervous, because they were about to leave, and I'd be alone in there with him. I thought about saying something to the women, to see if they'd stay, but thought I might just sound crazy. After they'd left, I darted out one of the big entry doors. There were 2 of them on adjacent sides of the store, and I ran over to our sister store across the way and told a guy I had befriended about what was happening. He went over to my store as the guy was walking out quickly, then came back to his store and immediately called security. He'd agreed that it was super creepy, and thankfully the security guy found him and said something to him, but I'm not sure what. The guy immediately left the mall, and I had my friend walk me to my car when we got off of work. About a week later, the same guy came in while I was working, but luckily one of my co-workers was there with me this time. I was running the cash register, and the guy walked around for a few minutes looking at shoes, then grabbed some socks and came to check out. The whole time he was giving me this creepy grin, as he knew that I'd called security on him. He took his bag and watched me as he left, and I thankfully never saw him again, although I did feel nervous about it for the rest of the time I worked there, which was about a couple of months. I don't know if the guy would have actually done anything, but I was 5'6" and about 130 pounds at the time. I felt like he was getting pleasure out of making me nervous. I still get the creeps when I think about it. So one day, I went out for some fresh air because it was sunny, and I ended up walking over to a nearby lake to go for a jog. It was a little on the crowded side, but I was able to navigate my way through people without too much issue. I made my way about halfway around the lake and exited out onto a street adjacent to the park. I relaxed in the shade for a little while, and then started walking, I think, in the direction of my house. At that point, my husband called to check in and asked if I'd like him to come pick me up. I declined as I was doing a step challenge with my work, and one of my co-workers kept getting ahead of me. I laughed and said it sort of defeats the purpose of going for a walk if I have him come get me, but I'll call him if I get tired. I was fairly certain I knew where I was going, and eventually found my way to a major street that connects to the one that will lead me home. The street I needed to turn onto was Maryland Avenue, which will eventually become Messer Street after about 3 miles. As I was walking up to the crosswalk, an old pickup truck pulled up to the lights. The window rolled down and I could see 2 silhouettes through the window behind the passenger seat, as well as a driver and a front seat passenger. 4 in total. The passenger leaned out of the window and called out to me. He was older, overweight, and had a goatee. I politely pulled one of my earbuds out and paused my music, and the man said that he'd seen me walking back over on Messer Street. I said, "Oh, yeah, that was me." He then asked me if I wanted to be his new friend. I declined and said I was married, gesturing to the silicone band I wear when I exercise. He said he was too. Then I put my earbud back in, told him to have a nice day, and turned on to Maryland Avenue. The pickup truck screamed as the driver revved his engine, and they kept driving straight on. About a mile later, I was at another major intersection when I noticed a different man in a grey sweatshirt with cut-off sleeves come up to the crosswalk from a nearby gas station parking lot. I made sure my face mask was in place as he stared down at the phone in his hand. The light then turned green and I crossed the street, noticing that he was walking in the same direction I was. He was lagging behind me about 20 feet, but somehow managed to catch up to me at every crosswalk. I tried to meet his gaze to smile at him in a "Hey buddy, I see you" type of way, but he wouldn't look at me in the eye, and every time I turned to look at him, his gaze and his phone lowered from me to the ground. I got the sense I was being watched, or sized up, or something, and I didn't like it. I was then walking past a building with a lot of windows, and saw him walking faster to catch up with me in the reflection. I pointedly stared at the reflection and sped up, and he matched my pace. I felt more uneasy. Finally I got to River Street, which is the last major intersection before the road will lead to my neighborhood. I obviously don't want this man to know where I live, so I pushed the button for the crosswalk, going over in my head what my options were. I could call my husband to come get me, but I was worried about staying put to wait for him or trying to find somewhere safe for him to pick me up. I could keep going straight and run into one of the neighborhoods across the street, but they're all cul-de-sacs, and the chances are he'd be able to corner me. My feet hurt, I was tired, and I don't think I could have outrun anyone. The light then turned green, but the red hand for the crosswalk stayed put. An idea came to me, and just as the light turned yellow, I sprinted as fast as I could across River Street before the man could react. I made it to the other side and turned back to look at him as he was hammering on the button for the crosswalk. There were too many cars for him to safely cross, and I turned right to walk along River Street and looked over my shoulder. He was watching me, so I started running again. After running a couple of blocks down River Street, I turned left onto a street that runs parallel to the one I needed to take home. But before I turned, I'd seen that he had made it across the street and was jogging in my direction. I made another immediate left and sprinted for the end of the block. My legs were screaming at me, and my heartbeat was hammering in my ears, but I didn't stop until I'd reached the end. I crouched down and peeked out from behind a corner in time to see him jog to the intersection and look down the street. He started to come down the street that I was on, hesitated, then turned and went back the other way. I kept low and slowly walked towards where he was, and I kept going until I could see him. He was walking along River Street and talking on his phone, so I took an alternate route home, looking over my shoulder often to make sure he hadn't decided to come back for me. I don't know what he wanted, and I'm not sure if he was one of the silhouettes I'd seen in the pickup truck, or if it was just a creepy day all around. But regardless, I'm glad he didn't follow me, and I hope I don't see him again. So this was back in the early 90s, when I was around 9 or 10 years old, when latchkey kids were fine and no one blinked an eye. One night I was home alone and decided to take a walk to my local Blockbuster, which was maybe 30 minutes there and back. I had done it a few times before on my bike, so wasn't worried or scared in the slightest. But as I got about halfway down my block, all the craziness started. Just a note that unbeknownst to me, my neighbour's son was a drunk or drug addict. At least something was wrong with him. And my parents knew about it, but hadn't told me because I had moved out a while back, so I guess it was irrelevant. But anyway, all of a sudden came a cherry picker roaring down the street and going really fast. I remember because several other cars had passed, but this one made me jump and look up. There was a shirtless man standing at the top of the cherry picker, hollering out your basic drunken nonsense. I immediately felt uncomfortable, and before I could decide what I wanted to do, he spotted me. He yelled something out at me and threw a beer bottle, which freaked me out, so I immediately decided that the trip was over, and I wanted to go home. So I turned around and started back towards my house, but nervously made the decision to head into people's yards, to make it look like I was going into a house. It didn't help though. He was already heading towards me, and the driver down below was now slapping his hand on the truck door, and obviously drunk as well. They were yelling out to me with garbage like, "Hey little girl, where are you going?" I ducked behind a house and saw a large pine tree between the 2 yards, so I jetted out and ducked behind it to see if they were still following me. But to my absolute horror, the guy in the bucket shouted out, "I see you hiding behind that tree, little girl." At that point I lost it and ran as fast as I could in a sheer panic, all the way to my house backyard, ran inside and locked the door behind me. I quickly checked any other locks in the house, then went into my parents' master bathroom, crawled into their shower and put a towel over me. I was sobbing. I phoned my mum and dad, who told me to immediately hang up and call 911. I did so, and the operator asked me if I was well hidden, which terrified me even more. Nothing thankfully happened after that, and the cops arrived right after my parents pulled in and acted like they had been home the whole time. I roll. But they're good people. The cops actually found the men, and they were arrested and charged with what they had done to me and several other things that they'd been up to that day. I wasn't the only one they'd harassed in our neighborhood, but I was the only child. It turned out it was our neighbor's drunk and disorderly son. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Also, check out my new YouTube membership levels for some exclusive perks. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.